Welcome to PBL Simplified podcast. My name is Ryan. I am your host. Also serve as the leader of Magnify Learning, where we do project-based learning workshops, coaching across the country, provide a ton of resources. I'm also an author and speaker. I wrote a book called PBL Simplified, and you can get the book study to go along with that. It walks you through the 6 steps of project-based learning, and you can do it with your staff. We've actually got a free book study we'll put in the link, where as you do it with the staff, you've got discussion questions, you've got next steps. But the whole idea is that it's not PBL watered down. We didn't change any of those processes. There's still rigor, there's still authenticity, there's still real world problem solving. We simplified. We've been doing this for a decade. And in the very beginning stages, it was really hard and fun at the same time. But we were making up group contracts. We were staying up the night before so we could figure out what to do with our kids the next day. We were making schedules, adjusting them. And then we were training other teachers. This is a super grassroots movement. So then it was like, it used to be 5 days. Now it's down to 3 if you look at the training. And what we used to do is it was like, we'd get the need to knows, we'd figure out a whole bunch of stuff, make a presentation, and then train people the next day. Well, after you do that for a decade, you know what you should be training people on. We know what the need to knows are. So that became a book, published through Morgan James Publishing. You can get it at Amazon or wherever you buy your books. And it literally walks you through the 6 steps. Gives you stories, some fail stories, some win stories, a place to start. There's resources specifically for the book. So as you go through the book, you can actually, like in the section on grouping, you can actually download the group contract. We give you a link right to all the resources for every chapter. So you can get all that stuff in the show notes. We'll have a link to the book study, and you can do it as a team, as a small group. Whoever's excited about it, you can do it by yourself. But it's a great way to get started. You can start your first PBL unit like that. You can invite someone in if you're already doing PBL. The person you're inviting in might be a little hesitant. So the structure of a book study might be helpful. Check it out. Let me know what you think. Today we've got episode 135, and we're talking about voice and choice. And it's part of a larger series, a 4-part series. This is the 4th one, last one. So you've got to go back a couple of the leadership episodes, back to episode 130. And the whole idea is how do you get people to ooch into PBL? If you're a school leader and you're getting ready to start project-based learning, well, where in the world do I start? This is a way to help you. You can start with growth mindset. You can start with real-world problem solving. It's kind of hard to say 3 times fast. You can start with culture. That's what the past episodes were about. And this one's about voice and choice. You can make some small steps to get closer to project-based learning. If you want some help planning out the next 3 years, that's what we do at Magnify Learning. One of the things we do is we help leaders plan out the next 3 years. We do it through a 2-day process. We call them design days. And you plan out the next 3 years of what implementing project-based learning could look like. Done with a lot of schools across the country very successfully, and we'd be happy to help you. In the meantime, you've got this podcast where I try to give you a lot of those same ideas. Can't get quite in depth because we're only going to be talking for a half hour, but if you stay tuned, this should grow your leadership in project-based learning. We've got a couple other things we're going to talk about today. Before we get to the main episode, we've got a need to know for leaders. This is a good one. How do I stop working so much on the weekends? And you probably get that if you haven't done this intentionally. But this is where I do some coaching with leaders. And that's one of the first things that we try to do is we try to decrease some of that work that happens on the weekends so we can increase that time with family and those relationships. Those are important. It actually makes your work better and you have better relationships. So that's part of the process. When we do group coaching, you do it directly with me. It's a money-back guarantee that we will decrease your hours on the weekend, we'll decrease your stress, and we'll increase your output, your impact. We'll increase your impact. And then we've got a leadership leap today with an interesting book. It's called Parenting Champions: What Parents Need to Know About the Mental Game by Larry BASSHAM. I think I'm saying the name right. And Larry was an Olympic gold medalist and world champion rifle shooter. He won a silver medal first, and he said that he had a mental meltdown in 1972 Olympics. So then he spent hours and years talking to every gold medalist he could find to look at the thinking that they do. Not the physical, but the thinking. So he's got some really great thoughts that he puts towards parents as we bring our kids into, making things happen. Right? We've got kids, maybe they're in sports, maybe they're not. Maybe they want to write a book or a podcast. My kids have a podcast and they're writing books, those kind of things. So it's like, what's their mental framework you need for some of those things? And Larry's got a really interesting take that I think you'll appreciate. So we'll dive into that leadership leap, and then we'll get into our voice and choice for the main episode topic. But first, let's jump into our need to know. The need to know is, how do I stop working so much on the weekends? And this, again, it's in my leadership coaching, but we're gonna dive into it real quickly here. In the leadership coaching, obviously, we get into individualized pieces and we, customize it just for you. But the main idea is that there's likely things that you're doing on the weekend that you don't have to do. You say, well, yeah, I do. This is part of what a leader's job is, the loneliness of leadership. The loneliness of leadership is real. That's why you should do group coaching and have a peer group of some kind or mastermind, whatever you want to call it. You need to be doing those things. But working on the weekends is not one of those. So there are ways that you can take whatever you're doing on the weekend and move it into your week and squish it in. And actually, I mentioned this in the last podcast. We were talking about stress in episode 133. The first thing you think about is eliminate, automate, and delegate. Eliminate, automate, and delegate. So you have to do an assessment of your week in order to do that. So what is it that you're leaving for the weekend? And I can't get it all in. And maybe you're catching up on emails. Maybe it's deep work. You can't get to your deep work because you feel like you're always putting out fires during the day throughout your school week. But the first thing we would do is create an audit of what it is you're doing on the weekends. We'll do the same thing. It's going to be eliminate, automate, and delegate. And most of the time it's eliminate, or we move it into a section into your Tuesday. Typically, I love Tuesday morning. Tuesday morning from 9 to 10, you block that out. You make it deep work time. Cal Newport wording right there. That deep work time from 9 to 10, you shut your door. We probably want to move you away from open door policy altogether. Like, you need time. And if you don't believe me, you should go back to the episode. I'm going to find this on the fly is what I'm going to do right here. Episode 129, Jennifer Cox and Josh Rhodes. And they're high flyers. They're excellent administrators. Excellent administrators. They get deeper learning. They understand leadership. And in that talk, they talk about, you need time to do good work, or you're not going to do good work. So you need to be talking to leaders that understand this. Like, there is an idea of like the busy leader. Just because you're busy doesn't mean you're doing it right? A lot of times it's the opposite. Like, you need to up your leadership game so that you can delegate well, so that not everything's on your plate, right? So that you have time to think big picture. And that's kind of this mini lesson that we have in getting the hours out of your weekend. This stuff that's happening on your weekend, that's overflow. That's not having the correct boundaries. That's finding time to do deep work. Typically, that's what I walk through with leaders. And then we free up your weekend. When you free up your weekend, now you start doing things that you enjoy on the weekend. You're with family. You're with your kids if you have kids. You're doing a hobby. Right? You're doing those things that de-stress you. You have less stress. You can be a better leader. And then the next week, you're fired up and you get more work done. Right? So it's a great cycle. It's a really great cycle once you start discovering boundaries and deep work. So that's where we start, and that's our need to know today. And again, we didn't attach any names to that because that's multiple leaders that I work with. I don't want to call anybody out on that. But, and a lot of times, if I'm real honest, you don't ask that question. You should. That's not a question. When I say, hey, if you go to whatispbl.com, you can go to Ask Ryan. Nobody asks, how do I stop working on the weekends? But you need to, because you need to be working 10 years from now. Unless you're getting ready to retire. But I need you to work 10 years from now because this is important work. And you need longevity in your stint as a visionary leader so that you can pass that on. So there's a succession plan to pass it on to the next leader. You need to have culture established. You need to have boundaries established. You need predictable success. And that takes time. And if you're stressed out and you're working weekends and it's stressing your family, it's not good for the work you do, but it's also not good for you as a person, which I think is actually more important. So the work's important, but your family's more important. And you can do both. You can. Like, you really can. And there are some jobs that are difficult. Like, if you are a middle school, high school principal at a large, comprehensive high school, like, that's a hard job. It's a super hard job. And there's some hours involved in that. There's still work we can do. Right? So wherever you're at, let's decrease those hours on the weekend. The first thing is to note that you shouldn't be working on the weekends. Not like you are, probably. You don't have to. This leadership leap, which again is meant to take your leadership to the next level and give you a quick synopsis of a book that I like. Not all the books make a leadership leap. Not all the ones I read, although I usually get good recommendations from good people. That's how I pick books. So usually they're spot on, but I don't bring them all to you if they don't relate to you in education as a leader. Parenting Champions, I think it does. says what parents need to know about the mental game. Like how do you work on the mental game with your kids? It's not something we talk about. And let me read right here from Larry first to get us started off. Ask any elite athlete what percentage of their sport is mental, and you will get a huge number back. The statement I hear most often is my game is 90% mental. Now I ask the second question. If your game is 90% mental, what percentage of your time and money have you spent learning mental skills? The answer I receive most often is 5 to 10%. Now that just doesn't make sense. The thing that's most important is the thing that we tend to ignore. And that's good. And again, Larry's a Olympic gold medalist in rifle shooting. So the mental game there is huge. So he gets it. So why parenting champion? It's like he's talking to parents about how they talk to their kids. And it goes back to the book Soundtracks with John Acuff. Like, what are the things your kids are saying to themselves? What are you saying to yourself? So there are a lot of applications to this. But again, I'm not scared to bring you a book that's going to help you as a parent. When you're a better parent and family life is better, you're a better leader. Can you being a great person, having integrity in everything that you do is really important to the work and the world. So it just so happens I think you're really important. So I am going to bring you this book, Parenting Champions. Another quote from Larry. I was motivated to the point of passion. When a person is passionate about something, training is not something they have to do, it's something they get to do. So we're getting to the point where maybe we talk about sports, maybe we're talking about writing, but your kids are excited about it. Practice is fun. But how do you get really, really good? Like how do you go from, oh gosh, it's another book I just read. I want to mess it up just a little bit. But if you want to be mediocre, your margin for error is very high, right? Like, you don't really have to practice your guitar that much. You don't have to, you don't have to shoot a whole bunch of free throws to be mediocre. But if you want to be good or great, you're going to start saying things like best. I could get a little out of the growth mindset maybe, but we're going to keep a growth mindset throughout this because competition's still in there. Competing against yourself. Once you start getting to that level though, your margin of error is smaller and you need to be mastering, that's the physical game, but also mastering the mental game. I wish I would have known this when I was in high school running. I was pretty good, but I didn't master the mental game. I just made it happen. And so I would say went the other way. Like it formed my mental game and I'm probably benefiting from some of that now, but now I'm doing this work intentionally. I'm doing it with my kids too. All right. So let's get back into some things that Larry says here. Amateurs practice until they can get it right. Professionals practice until they can't get it wrong. Well, that's Harold Craxton. Comes out of his book though. He's talking about musicians. Amateurs practice until they get it right. Professionals practice until they can't get it wrong. Currently learning the guitar. I'm not actually to the point where it's right yet, let alone like I can't get it wrong, but I'm getting closer. Like my strum pattern is spot on. So I can read the music while I'm doing the strum pattern. So I'm getting to that point, but I'm going to keep practicing. Now, I don't get down on myself. My mental game says that I'm going to get there. That I'm going to get there because my kids play musical instruments and we're going to play in a band together. Like when I pastored a church, we played in front of the church and I wasn't good. My son's like, Dad, do you think you should play the right chords? Like, dude, I would love to, but I don't know how yet. Right? So I always put that in there. So we're constantly looking at what is our mental game. Here's Larry's story. This is crazy. And this is why you are so important in the classroom. Your teacher is important. So Larry says, I was in 6th grade. We were studying the Olympics in school. The teacher said, it's possible that someone in this class might become an Olympic champion someday. I wonder who would have the best chance in this class. A boy sitting behind Larry jumped right up and said, Teacher, I don't know who would have the best chance, but I know for certain who would have the worst chance. Larry. It's like, what? Except that his name is LANNY. I've been calling him Larry this whole time. Goodness, that's embarrassing. But you're going to find out because you're going to like this book. So you're going to go find out that it's LANNY. So don't tell LANNY. But anyway, I'm reading the quote and I see his name. But he knows for certain that it's not LANNY. So here's this awful thing. He gets called out. So what happens? Who comes to his rescue? It's actually not the teacher in this chance, but it's his dad. You know who gave him hope, encouragement, confidence to believe that he could achieve great things? His dad. His dad comes in and says, you might not be there yet. He gives him this growth mindset talk before growth mindset was cool. And that's what happens. His dad stepped in and gave him the mental game to literally go from, like someone could call me out, like, dude, you're not going to the Olympics, to going to the Olympics, winning a gold medal. Winners have one thing in common. They're goal getters. Now, Lanny's got this idea, not goal setting, goal getting. And Lanny's very growth mindset throughout the book. So he's talking about goal getters. Ask parents if it's important for their kids to have goals, and most will say it's important. Most books on goal setting are results oriented, and I have a problem with that. This is why I like Lanny's approach, because it's about becoming a great student athlete or becoming a great person. It says attainment is the total of accomplishment and becoming. So he's looking towards attainment, very growth mindset oriented. So if you've got kids that are in sports and they want to be great, they need to master the mental game. And we want them to be great people. I think Lanny does a good job of that. So let me give you another quote. I want to give you another quote from him. When you find your kids beating themselves up, you must correct this abusive behavior. Remind them that if they prepare properly, there are few things in life they cannot accomplish. When your kids are beating themselves up, you must correct this abusive behavior. And that's good. That's strong language from an Olympic champion that knows how to do it, and he teaches others. Go get that book. It's called Parenting Champion. All right, our episode topic for today is voice and choice. And the framing that we're putting on this is that you're either a PBL leader that is going to start project-based learning in your school, and you want to start ramping it up so that you can get to a training, get to something more formal, start moving towards your vision. Or maybe you're a leader who's doing project-based learning. Well, let's just admit that not all of your staff is there yet. And then we have to doubly admit that if you just fired those ones that weren't doing PBL, it would not solve the problem. When you look at the innovation curve, and I talk to leaders about this, it's like, well, why don't we just get rid of the back half of the innovation curve? Because the innovation curve is the innovation curve for a reason. Like, it still comes back. Like, someone else will step into those other spots. You have to learn how to lead those people on the back end of the innovation curve. And you just have to scaffold things, just like you would in a classroom. Like, how do you bring them along in a different way than your innovators and your early adopters? So that's what we're talking about. Voice and choice. We're trying to move, here's the goal. We're trying to move kids or your staff from passive to empowered, to just sitting in the back of a staff meeting to actually being engaged in the staff meeting. And voice and choice happens on a continuum with engagement going across. On one side, you've got like zero voice, zero choice. You sit in a classroom seat where I tell you to, you use a Ticonderoga pencil, you write when I tell you to write, you stop when I tell you to stop. If you move across that continuum, it's like, well, now you can pick your seat. Oh, we always like those teachers. We got to pick our seat. We have some choice. We give you some voice. You said you wanted to use book fair pencil, so I'm going to let you use a book fair pencil. And you keep moving across that continuum, and you get more engaged each time. But if you keep going on that continuum, eventually you hit anarchy. And anarchy is bad. Like, wherever you're at in K-12, like, anarchy is bad on that entire scale. So you don't want to go that far. So it depends on where your teacher's at, depends on where the kids are at. But as you move across, there's more engagement. I'm assuming that anarchy is a very engaging activity, but it's not positive. So you can't go that far. But you do want to go across that spectrum somewhere. So let's break down how we can move a little bit farther down that continuum, or maybe nudge our teachers to go a little bit farther down that continuum to dip their toe into this. So we're going to use 3 different ideas to move our students farther down the continuum of voice and choice to be more engaged and get closer to project-based learning. The first one is student voice. And we separate voice and choice in this case, right? There you go. The spoiler alert, next one's going to be student choice. But in student voice, we're asking students, like, what do you think? What's on your mind? And you can ask the same thing to your teachers. And immediately something happens in the human brain, right? Like, you're more involved. So I don't know if you have cable, but I used to have internet out in the country. And when we had internet on the cable, from the cable company, like, it was awful. So you would call and it wasn't good. Like, you were probably going to complain. You were going to ask for some help. You weren't going to get it. It wasn't going to be great. So they would always ask you, like, before you start the call, would you participate in a 5-minute survey at the end? So you talk to the person. It didn't go well. You didn't get what you wanted. You didn't get a refund. You didn't get better service. And then you get to leave a survey. So, well, I'm going to leave a survey. I'm going to tell you what, I'm going to leave a survey. And I firmly believe that the survey is just there so that you feel better, that you got to say some of the things you wanted to say. To test it out, I took one of the surveys and I put all ones. It was like 1 out of 5, but all ones. And I said, I got awful service. The person was mean. Somebody should call me. Call me. And nobody called. So I stopped taking those surveys from then on. I literally think they're there because if we get to voice something, we're just more engaged. We feel better about it because we get it off of our chest, out of our heads, and to somebody, even if nobody acts on it. Now you're going to act on it because you're engaged, more engaged than the internet company. I hope. Goodness, it'd be hard not to be. Different rant though. So where do you ask students for their input? If you want a structural idea, I suggest a student voice group. You could do this by grade level. You could do it as principal, but you just bring in students from varying degrees. Like don't pick all the kids at the top of the honor roll because it doesn't mean they're engaged anyway. So pick kids from all around your spectrum and then just ask them questions. Have them come in for lunch. Say, hey, I'm the principal. I'm here to listen to some things. What do you guys have to say? What's going well? What would you like to improve? And then find one of those things that they want to improve and do it. And say, hey, everybody, 300 kids in our school. Your student voice group said you wanted this, and I'm going to give it to you. Now, you can't give them everything because otherwise you'd have Ferris wheels at your school and it probably doesn't fit the budget. But letting the students know that they have a voice, someone they can go to that their voice can be heard is a big deal because kids don't usually get much of a voice in the world. Now, how else can you do this at the classroom level? You can do it at the end of a unit. Have your teachers do this. At the end of a unit, just say, hey, what did you like about this unit? What do you wonder about this? What could we fix if we did it again? Because we're going to do more units. What could be better? And everybody's going to ask for more time. And you don't have to give them more time, but find one thing. Encourage your teachers to give one thing that shows that you're listening. Right? You said that you wanted the rubric up front instead of at the end. So I'm going to give you the rubric up front so you know exactly what we're grading. Oh, great. Oh, look at that. Mrs. Smith listened to me. Nobody ever listens to me. This is great. And you get more engagement right away. You could do it at the end of a convocation. Like if you have a student, you have a motivational speaker come in, which is a great idea. I've got one coming up on the podcast in a couple of months as a guest. At the end of anything, really. Just at the end of your faculty meeting, ask your teachers to give you feedback. What did you like about this faculty meeting? What would you change? Oh, I'm scared to hear what they say. Don't be. Don't be. Be open to it. And you don't have to do everything that they say, but you should hear about it. Try to act on one of those things. When you give people a voice, they're more engaged. They lean in just a little bit closer and they're more on board. So find a way to get student voice because it's really important. Let me give you one more example. Student example. We had a student in my classroom that was literally the lowest. So out of 951 kids in middle school, 7th and 8th grade, he had the lowest NWA score. Literally the lowest. We gave him project-based learning, and that moves learners. So he immediately jumped like 20 points. He probably jumped 20 points because we showed we cared. Jumped 30 because he got good learning, and probably another 20. And some of these numbers I'm making up. But it was a ridiculous amount of growth because he started asking questions. He had given up asking questions. He said this out loud. I gave up asking questions because people wouldn't help me. Now, it's because he was asking questions because he was several grade levels behind. But we gave him a voice. We asked his questions, then we created workshops based on whatever he asked. And he learned that if we asked questions, that we would teach him things. And because of that, he actually learned things for very long. And he hadn't done that in a long time. Voice can change the environment and culture of a classroom or a staff culture. Give people a voice. Second aspect of voice and choice is the choice side. So student choice. Big picture learning. We went out to go visit one time and really neat ecosystem. So they're doing project-based learning and they have a piece where they're actually creating PBL units specifically for individual students. So every student can get their own PBL unit that they're creating. We don't just really go with this for Magnify learning. We think it's a little bit broader audience for us. But it's a neat idea. And the choice is like, you have to learn these things. What do you want to learn it through? And the example we got was like, let's say I'm really interested in the Vietnam War. All right. So you're going to study the Vietnam War until you just can't study it anymore. And the idea is like, you get so curious, you learn so much that you move on to the next thing that you're interested in. And you keep following your passions and your interests and your inquiry throughout your learning. It's pretty neat. But they're engaged because they got choice. Somebody else maybe is studying birding, right? And that's their whole PBL unit, like individually created. At Magnify Learning, we're going to have teachers create things for their classes, maybe groups of 4, 2, whatever best fits. We believe the local educator can figure that out on their own. We're going to guide them through that process. So we don't have that strict, it has to be individualized, but it's a really interesting idea because the student has full choice, which gives you, just like anarchy, right? Gives you full engagement. So I like that model. It's really interesting. So how else can you give students choice? You can give them choice in their groups. Well, they're just going to pick their friends. Yep, they are. And then they're going to learn because you're going to reflect at the end and say, was that a good idea? No, it wasn't. Are you going to do it again? Probably. But you're going to learn from it. And eventually the kids start asking, hey, Mr. Story, would you pick our groups for us? Because otherwise I'm going to be in his group because he's my friend and I don't want to be. He's not very good at this. Right? And they start to learn things through that. Your groups weren't going to be that great if you picked them anyway. So give them some choice. Now, there's different learning styles. I know there's some research that shows that learning styles like possibly don't even exist and aren't helpful, but we all think they do. So give us some choice in how we want to learn things. Maybe you want to learn it auditorily, like you want to hear it. Maybe you want to see it. Maybe you want something that's more tactile. Like give kids a choice in that. Like given the choice, I'm probably going to listen to something. Like I love to learn by listening. So that would be my choice. Now, is it the best way I learn? I don't know, but I enjoy it. Give me the choice. So what are all the places that you can give kids choice? And just start with the ones that don't really matter, right? Like pick your seat. I don't know. Pick your pencil. And so find some ones where it doesn't matter and start there and just ooch, but you'll see kids start to say, oh, I get choice here. And as adults, I think we want choice too. I think there's a piece there that our human nature wants choice. So I think you need to work that in. The more you can do it, again, the more engaging it is. It has to be a place where you or your teachers are ready for it. That's where you should go. You can't just say, Ryan said this, so now do that. You have to figure it out. You have to do the experimentation to figure out the right level of voice and choice that's needed. The last one I'm going to give you is student agency. And the push here is to grade student agency. Agency being like, how invested are the kids in their learning? Like, are they turning things in? Are they doing the work? Are they like moving towards learning? My example for that is Matt. And Matt was a super smart kid that got straight A's. Now, he knew a bunch of stuff. He knew how to memorize things and put it on tests. He was very good at that. If there was a blank, he put a word in it. But he never did it on time, right? So he was always late. So in my class, he got an A in content, he got an A in collaboration, he got an A in communication, and he got an F in agency. Now the percentages worked out. He still got an A in my class because agency was 5%. But on his report card, the full report card showed an F, and Matt doesn't get F, so Matt's mom was in. And just like in any good student conference, if a parent comes in, the kid should be there, right? Yes. And the mom says, Matt doesn't get Fs, what happened? And I turn to Matt and say, hey, Matt, you don't get Fs, what happened? And Matt said, I didn't get an F, I got an A. Look, it says A right there. Yep, but mom and I are pretty smart too, smart guy. And what's that F in? It's an agency. Explain to your mom what agency means. It means that I didn't turn stuff in on time, but I know everything, so what's the big deal? Aha. The big deal, my friend, is that you're going to go to college and you need some agency for that. And it's going to get hard. Eventually things get hard and it's going to be hard for you. And mom and I and Matt had this really good conversation about how Matt doesn't turn things in, but he knows how to regurgitate information, but it's not going to help him long term. And we were able to turn that around in 8th grade. Matt's super successful. In fact, he's a teacher now and teaches project-based learning, which he used to push back against, because a lot of our students that push back on project-based learning, a lot of times it's our point getters because they know the game and they're good at it. But it's not good for them. Getting points is not good. Just because you can get points. We tell kids that they're winning, and it's one of the worst things we could do, I think. This is a whole nother side rant that I could go on and get up on my soapbox. But we tell kids they're winning, and they're not, because then they go to get hired, and nobody has 30 people sit in a room and just tell them information they already know. So we've got to tell our point getters that winning looks different. Winning looks different. But that's probably a whole other podcast episode. So when you start pushing your teachers toward project-based learning, you start nudging them, I should say. You start saying, hey, this is the direction we're going to go. Student voice, student choice, student agency, not just grades or what is a grade, is a really great conversation. I've got that one in my book too. In BBL Simplified, I've got a grading chapter just talking about what is in a grade. Really good conversation right there. Is it that I know the information? Is it that I didn't turn my work in? Or is it that I'm a nice kid, so I still get a C even though I didn't do anything? There's a lot of things in a grade. So student agency really starts to move that conversation around in a pretty interesting way. So hopefully this helps you, and this series helps you figure out how to ooch a little closer to project-based learning, or bring some of your individual teachers towards project-based learning if they're a little bit farther away than you'd like. We talked about, in these last episodes, we talked about culture, because you can have great culture even in a traditional classroom. You can have real-world problem solving in a traditional classroom, and you can bring voice and choice into a traditional classroom, and you should. It's going to get you closer to project-based learning, which I think that's where you need to be. That's what we're doing to change the world. We're going to have 51% of schools doing PBL by 2051 because kids move from passive to purposeful. They move from yelling to having conversations. They move from being apathetic to being engaged, and that's where we need them. That's how we change the world. So thank you so much for tuning into this leadership episode today. Hopefully it was helpful in getting you a little bit closer to your goal and your vision so that you can engage your learners, tackle boredom, and transform your classrooms. Go lead inspired. Thank you for listening to today's episode of the PBL Simplified podcast. Gosh, I appreciate it. Super humbled that you took your time to listen. Would you take another 2 minutes, though, and leave a review for this podcast? When you do, it lets the next curious educator know that this is a podcast worth listening to, and we can invite them on a PBL journey just like you.